So, George, how long are we going to keep up these charades? Hmm? Seems like, you've been in hiding for a few months now. Nobody's seen you, not getting anything from your mouth, although the propaganda machine's working quite a bit of overtime. But I'm wondering, at what point are you going to realize the damage that you're doing to somebody's reputation, aside from yours, of course? Just got to know. Because, you know, stories like this, they're almost in direct contrast to what you're talking about and what you have your people talking about. Guys like Canzano and Wilner, and even Monty. Not that Monty has a whole lot of credibility to spare, um, but you're kind of killing Canzano and Wilner. Something seems wrong, though. Something seems awfully wrong. Welcome back to the Hall of Fame College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Watkins. And if you love college football, you know you're in the right place. So before you forget, smash that red subscriber button, like our videos, and don't forget to ring that bell so you don't miss one moment of the Hall of Fame College Football Podcast. Welcome back to the show, everybody. Just wanted to jump in here a little bit. There's a few things. We're going to have a couple of videos today, and we're going to be going live this evening as well. George Kliavkoff. We've been talking about this quite a bit, and it's getting a little crazy, George. And what's funny is, well, it's not that funny, but just a few days ago, of course, you had reports, and this is the same kind of stuff that's been going on for months. And as I said there in the opening, you're not hearing a lot of this coming directly from George Kliavkoff, who was obviously telling everybody what a great deal he was going to get for him. All the Pac-12 conference presidents, what a great media rights deal he was going to get for their football programs, well above anything of the Big 12. And then, of course, he started getting lapped by Brett Yormark. But if you hear these apologists telling it, if you watch on Twitter, if you watch the podcast of John Wilner and John Canzano, it's a little off. It's a little off. What I would tell you is that while Canzano and Wilner have been generally considered respected journalists for most of their career, I really do think that they're getting their career imploded right here, right now. And it's a sad deal, to be honest with you, because of the fact that it just, to me, it seems like they're in direct contrast to reports by guys like Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports, well respected, Pete Thamel, ESPN, well respected, well connected. Brett McMurphy from the Action Network. This is one of my favorite journalists around. He is well connected. And then you're even talking about guys like from the New York Daily News, Andrew Marchand, The Athletic. I mean, just about everybody, aside from Monty from the Monty Show, which that guy's full of it. But it's kind of funny. We'll get into him in a second. And then Wilner and Canzano are pushing this narrative. And then you certainly have the University of Utah working overtime to kind of be the conference jerks uh, in all this deal too. But I feel like what it really boils down to, and this is the way I've been kind of looking at it over the last few days, is what it really boils down to is that you have a commissioner who's spineless, who is throwing everybody else out there under the bus. Now, don't get me wrong; these are both grown men, and in fact, so is Monty and his young boy Jake. They're grown, so they have the ability to say no to you. But I just wonder at what point this is going to kind of stop. As I was saying, on the 4th, that was yesterday, 2 days ago, whenever you see this, the Pac 12, Dennis Dodd actually got somebody to go on the record that is and this is another, just the latest in, um, well, sources, real sources that'll name themselves and talk to you about what is real. Dennis Dodd was able to get a big time source to go on the record here and talk about the fact that, as he says, the Pac 12 is very unlikely to reach media rights deal with more than 50% of games airing on television. This is, of course, Dennis Dodd's story on CBSSports.com. Time continues to run out on the conference, finding a viable option for exposure on linear television. So obviously, the 50%, even at 50%, that's not enough. If you start looking at what the Big 12 is at, it's in the contract that they did with Fox and ESPN that at least 70% of the games that they will have, all their football games, will be on linear television, either cable or regular television, one of the two, either ABC, Fox, or ESPN channels. Now, 70%. At this point, you're talking about, from what Dennis was saying in this, he said, as the Pac-12 continues its search for a new media rights deal, it's become less viable that the conference will land a partner willing to feature more than half its games on traditional cable or broadcast TV, according to media consultant Jim Williams. Jim Williams, of course, has won 7 Emmy awards. He is a Washington D.C. based 7-time Emmy award winning producer who developed 5 different regional sports networks throughout a career that began back in 1977. Not exactly, he's an expert. This is very similar to, when you start talking about, the people that are talking about this kind of stuff, and it's none of it's coming good. Pete Thamel is well respected, as I said. You start talking about guys like, Dennis Dodd. He's been around for a long time himself, and these guys are connected to people that know what they're talking about. Anyway, the assertion could be a deal breaker as far as Pac-12 presidents are concerned. Consider whether a deal heavy on streaming would be enough to keep their schools in the league. Arizona President Robert Robbins twice told CBS Sports in the last 3 weeks he expected over half of the Pac-12 content to be on traditional linear TV platforms such as CBS, Fox, ESPN, and NBC, considered the gold standard in live sports programming. Now, about 5 days ago, there's been reports out there. Of course, most of them are coming from places like Monty. But I did see a couple of places where, obviously he got it from somewhere. But again, it's that propaganda machine is what I'm trying to explain to people. And this proves it when you start talking to a guy like this. Williams, however, has decided to go on the record with comments being repeated throughout the sports media industry. So this isn't the only place that this story is. The Pac-12 may be running out of time in getting most of its content seen on a major linear carrier. He said, this is, according to Williams, this is Williams' quote here. I'm going to put it up there. I am at an absolute loss how NBC, CBS, ESPN, ABC, or Fox gets the Pac-12 to 50%. That's pretty straightforward. I don't know how anybody could sit there and assure you that we're going to have that much on linear. I don't see how they get there. Pretty straightforward. Now, getting on the linear carrier, as we've been talking about, and it's been talked about at length for a lot of guys. A lot of people out here, whether it be on YouTube, obviously you've heard it a lot from ESPN. Pete Thamel said a lot about that. Andrew Marchand has been at the forefront of that. Of course, you do have Dennis Dodd, who's been at the forefront of all this as well. And you've even had former executives from Fox Network, stuff like that, that have been saying the same thing, you know. Getting on one of these linear carriers is a key point in the Pac-12 maximizing its worth. Now, if you remember that Kliavkoff had decided that he was not going to, when they had their exclusive negotiating time back in 2022, they finished that time up without getting a deal. New commissioner of the Big 12, Brett Yormark, stepped in, got a deal done for his new league, and essentially took the deal that they had initially offered Kliavkoff that was turned down by not only just so this is the same deal, that's what they got, the same deal, but he jumped ahead of time. The Big 12's media deal wasn't over until 2025, but they went ahead and jumped ahead because they knew, as we've kind of talked about, and I said it on the live show the other night, Yormark was saying at the Super Bowl that he knew that there were a lot of media deals that were starting to come up outside of even college football. You've got the NBA, you've got NASCAR. The WWE just made a big splash. The UFC acquiring WWE, World Wrestling. This is all stuff that goes on television and is taking up room. You know, one of the nights that they do wrestling is on Thursday nights. So all of this stuff matters. Brett Yormark knew it, and he stepped in and made a deal happen. The one that Kliavkoff apparently wouldn't get, that they would not take at the Pac-12. This is a clear indication to me that this thing is about over with. Now, right now they're talking about, you see the Pac-12 saying we just got to get close enough to that 31.6, but not be a majority streaming partner. This is where the problem comes in. ESPN has already said, and they apparently haven't been speaking or negotiating whatsoever, that 31.6 million that they had offered the Pac-12, they pulled it. So that is no longer an offer. I think the highest that they're at is 10 million per school at this moment. I've heard it could even be lower than that, but that would be for one game a week on regular television on one of their networks. As you know, ESPN owns rights to the ACC, the SEC, full rights to the SEC, which is expanding with Oklahoma and Texas, and it owns the lion's share of the Big 12 content as well. There's just not a lot of room left to put games on. And the Pac-12 is essentially, well, unless you're listening to somebody like Wilner, Canzano, or our boy Monty over at the Monty Show, you're getting this information. And believe me, he's getting it too. We've had talks about, there's been talk out there about the Ion Network. There's been talk about the CW. USA Network was recent with when they started talking about a deal with Peacock and NBC. But the rest of what you've been hearing, aside from the ESPN, the small amount that they were willing to take at some point, I'm not even positive that they're willing to do that anymore, because they're not speaking to the Pac-12. But this is all coming from everybody but these three guys. But just as an example, I want to show you the kind of stuff that you're getting out of guys like our boy Monty here.
As the Pac-12 turns, a new report today, I believe from The Athletic, says that Arizona and Gonzaga are joining the Big 12 and that Arizona will be the first to bail.
Gonzaga.
To which I tell you, I think this is completely false. I don't believe this at all. I don't believe that Arizona, A, is going anywhere on their own, or B, is going to be the first one to jump, because they just aren't that kind of institution. That's just not who Arizona is. They're a basketball-only school, essentially, because their football program hasn't done anything ever in the history of football ever forever. And from what we've been told, they are very closely connected. And I think Gonzaga has zero impact on the Pac-12, because I think the Pac-12 is well aware that Gonzaga is not going to join the conference to this, and it doesn't pass the common sense test. And when I look at who's going where and when it's going to happen, we are not going to see anybody defect from the Pac-12 in a hurry. Absolutely possible. They've had extensive conversations. It's the same thing I tell you about Utah pretty much every day. Is it likely? No. Is it possible? Absolutely, it's possible. Have Utah, Arizona State had extensive conversations with Brett Yormark and others in the Big 12? They have. That's been confirmed 5 different ways by multiple sources.
Right.
So it's not a question of, is it possible? The question is it likely, and when will it happen? And I'm here to tell you, it's not going to happen until at least they get an offer on the table. Again, this is just my opinion. I don't see a path forward for this particular group of presidents to be forward thinking when it comes to stream and technology. I don't see a path forward where you can expect these guys to make the right decisions.
And when I say sourced information, I'm talking about like 4, 5, sometimes even 6 really high up the chain people saying pretty much the same thing, which is, hey, you're gonna be somewhere between 17 and 22 a year per.
I think we have been pretty consistent that they were never going to get $30 million. The indicator was the smear campaign from the Pac-12.
Yeah.
Oh, they left money on the table.
That the Pac-12 is in a situation where they have to figure out what the next chapter is going to look like, because I'm one of the people who is not confident that the Pac-12 will look the same, or that think that, you know, everyone, maybe not everyone, but I think a lot of people on our channel in the comment section want the Pac-12 to burn to the ground, and they want, you know, Oregon and UW to go to the Big Ten, and they want the 4 corner schools to go to the Big 12, and whatever happens to institutions like Oregon and Washington State, so be it. But I'm telling you, it's not as simple as that. It's not.
Actually, Jake, it kind of is. We're talking this video right here. These clips came from one live stream. One. Did you see how many times they went back and forth there? Between, what did they start off with? There's no way that report's correct. I don't know that it is or it isn't, but I haven't seen it from anywhere that I trust, because I certainly don't trust these guys. I hadn't even seen it from Wilner and Canzano. But, and then he went on to say that you're not going to see anyone defecting from the Pac-12 anytime real soon. Now, again, I don't believe the report. I didn't find it in the Athletic, so who knows where it is. I'm not gonna go on one of these wild Monty chases. Oh yeah, I don't see a path forward. So he's saying none of this is gonna happen, but then he goes on to tell everybody that he doesn't see a path forward for these presidents to move this conference forward with streaming, which this one I'm gonna say I'm gonna have to agree with, because the Pac-12 in its predicament, and this is coming from Dodd's story, the Big 12 is going to have that minimum of 70% of their games on linear television, just as we talked about, as according to their media rights. So they're also going to be at 31.6 million. The number for the Pac-12 that we've heard, which is probably why they haven't announced it, it's anywhere from, like, you know, these guys are talking about 17 to 22 million. I've heard anywhere from 15 million up to 25 million. You know, whether or not that's going to be close enough for them, I don't know. But the thing is like, you know, you had the New York Post reporting last month that ESPN did have that deal on the table that was equal to the Big 12 number. but that offer has since been revoked because of the fact that, again, there is just no inventory out there that they want to pay premium price for. They just don't, particularly with the league essentially falling apart. And this is the other part that you got to make sure that you keep in mind when you start thinking about this. It's not a hard place to get to. Um, Going back to let me go back to what Williams was saying though. After this, he said, "I think where we are right now, Apple would probably take a piece and maybe play with Amazon to give them a Friday night game as well. The trickier part is who then becomes the linear part of this deal. How are you going to tell Apple yes? How do you tell Amazon yes if you've got 80s and presidents that are saying, no, we can't do this? And that's exactly what's being said through this is again, if this was I I, I am not one of the people that doesn't think that thinks that there's no way that you could do a majority streaming. I mean, I don't see why you couldn't. I think that a lot more people are streaming than used to. Talking to my buddy Jay on Unfair Sports, he was saying that YouTube users have well surpassed normal cable and satellite users already. So that's a full time streaming. You also have other platforms like Streambox, things like that. So you have options to be able to do all your watch everything via streaming. I do myself. Now, is the rest of the world ready? Probably not. Are you going to get the bars ready? I mean, this is that you don't want to be the first one to do it, and particularly at a lower price. Apparently, they have not talked they haven't talked these presidents into it. The biggest two of which would be from Washington and Oregon. I mean, Washington and Oregon it's a non-starter for them. And it's starting to look like it's a non-starter for the four corner schools, which are Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and possibly Utah. Although I'd say Utah is the one that is being very, according to a lot of folks, and if you're listening to their fans, they want nothing to do with the Big 12, which is crazy to me. But this is where we are. I think that they're posturing themselves right out of an invite to the Big 12 if and when the Pac 12 goes under, which I'm going to tell you, I've been saying this. I think it's over for the Pac 12. And here's the reason why I really think it's over. In the end, the money is so far behind. Even let's say they got to 25 million, which is one of the highs. Hell, let's even say that they got to 30. So they're at 60 million. The Big 10, which is where Washington and Oregon are trying to get to, they're paying 80 million, and it will be upwards of well over 100 million by the end of the deal, which goes 5 years with the Big 10. It's 80 to 100 million dollars that each school will be getting. So just think about and I was watching the Locked On Big 12 podcast yesterday, and he made this analogy. If it was even if it was 30 million um per school, and they're giving you in the Big 10 schools are getting, let's say, 80 million. Now you're looking at that's $50 million a year behind your competitors. When you're talking about programs like Oregon and Washington, these guys fancy themselves as national title contenders. They want to play for national titles. You're not going to be able to stay up with the big boys in the Big 10 or the SEC, who is also paying upwards of 100 million on their new contract once Oklahoma and Texas join the league in 2024. It's going to be about the same. These two conferences, the SEC already runs college football. Imagine what it's going to look like with that much of a gap in revenue. This is not tenable for Oregon and Washington. Even if the deal was what they thought it should be in the Pac-12, which it won't be. Now that you have USC and UCLA going to the Big 10 starting next year as well. Even if it was, though, you're looking at a situation where you're that far behind. And even if you were right where the Big 12 was, you're still $100 million behind every 2 years. How long is it going to take you to fall completely out of touch? Not very long. So this pipe dream that they seem to have about these schools, even if they do a deal, signing a grant of rights, which means they're stuck in the deal, that is absolutely not going to happen. No way. I would tell you that Oregon and Washington, they already have a foot out the door. And if you're listening to what Dennis Dodd's saying, which he was talking about this a lot, that there's the whole deal with them is that they're flat out going to be um, the four corner schools are looking for a way out as well. You can tell that the Arizona president has been speaking to them a lot. According to Monty, even apparently so has Utah, even though they're the ones that really don't want to go. We're talking about a situation here where what is close enough? I mean, Williams was talking about that. Getting on those linear carriers is going to be a key point, because if they're, at least if they're not making the money, in order for recruiting, you have to remain visible. How many people are going to stream all across the country? And particularly when they play at weird times of the day, it's late. I mean, on the West Coast games that are starting at 6 o'clock, that's already 9 o'clock on the East Coast. This is a tough deal. The Big 12, meanwhile, remains interested in expanding with the four corner schools, which are again Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah. Again, what is close enough is what Williams was asking. I assume somewhere north of 25 million, in that 27 million to $28 million range category. Short of a major linear carrier, though, he was saying that Ion and the CW networks would be possibilities that he would see them as viable possibilities. The CW has recently, they are carrying Live Golf. It's not doing great on the station. Ion is owned by Scripps Company, which is a general entertainment network that's in 37 of the top 50 markets in the country. And it was definitely mentioned early in the process by Action Network, but it was kind of shot down quickly. CW is majority owned by the Nexstar Media Group. It's the group of stations reportedly reaches 100% of U.S. TV markets, providing 14 hours of primetime programming per week. Its most notable sports property right now, again, Live Golf. They could get on Ion or get in there with CW. Personally, if I were talking to one of these presidents, I would have zero problem with the CW. They've got legacy television stations all over the country. The list includes superstations, WPIX in New York, and KTLA in LA, Los Angeles. But again, no deal is imminent, according to what Dennis Dodd and CBS have been saying. Again, that tends to show you that they're not getting the price that they're asking for. Therefore, they're not wanting to present, and they're probably looking at, as this story is saying, a deal that's going to be heavy on streaming and be as much as half of what the Big 12 is getting on their deal that starts in 2025. This is not conducive for you keeping this deal. And I would tell you that this is a precipitous fall for the Pac 12, even for Kliavkoff. A lot of people are trying to put all of this in the lap of the last commissioner of the Pac 12, Larry Scott. He wasn't any good either. But this guy has taken misstep after misstep after misstep. He should have taken the deal. First and foremost, when Oklahoma and Texas decided to go to the SEC a couple of years ago, he had an opportunity to get four schools, completely wipe out the Big 12. Conference presidents, including UCLA and USC, turned their noses up at it. They didn't make the deal happen. That was a misstep. Then, even after Yormark was hired and they had replaced Oklahoma and Texas with four new schools of their own, Cincinnati, UCF, BYU, and Houston. Once that happened, then there was still that thought that, that's when USC and UCLA made the move to the Big Ten. And it caught everybody by surprise because you had Kevin Warren of the Big Ten doing a quote unquote handshake deal with Kliavkoff and the commissioner of the ACC as well, that they would not be poaching any member schools from each other. Obviously, that didn't last very long. Less than 9 months later, USC and UCLA announced that they were going to be going to the Big Ten. It's obviously signaling they would be on an island unless you add some more schools from the West Coast. The next closest ones are definitely probably, well, it's up to about 4 of them, but it could be as many as 4. When it's going to happen, nobody knows just yet. But I know that Phil Knight has been working hard to try to get Oregon and Washington up there. I don't think that Stanford and Cal care as much. Definitely Stanford doesn't. They're more about they would rather not play football than be in a conference with some of these things, like who they're trying to replace USC and UCLA with, teams like San Diego State. I don't see this happening very well for them. But essentially, Washington and Oregon got a foot out the door, and it won't be long until the Big Ten is going to be forced to let them come in there. They're not going to keep USC and UCLA happy for very long if they've got to play half of their schedule on the East Coast and Midwest. That's a long trip. The closest trip that they'll have, either school will have, obviously, is going to be Nebraska, and that's what 1,600 miles away. Still a long trek. And we're not even just talking about football. This is every sport. So again, one of them deals where this is begging another question of, would having a large amount of content on ESPN streaming platform be more acceptable than the Pac-12 having games on Apple or Amazon? That's assuming that ESPN is still involved. But to put the Pac-12 predicament in perspective, again, as I said, 70% of the Big 12 is being not streaming. It has been speculated that ESPN will take a piece of the Pac-12 along with the streaming provider. However, the New York Post did report last month that ESPN had revoked their deal that was going to be the same for the Big 12 that they had turned down. I feel like this is a situation. I mean, this is obvious. Everything is pointing to this is over with. CBS reported last week that no deal is imminent. Moving forward, the issue becomes whether schools pursued by the Big 12 get antsy enough to take more of what might look like a sure thing in the Big 12 conference. And again, you start thinking about some of the plans that Brett Yormark has for basketball. His plan is they're talking about Gonzaga. That's pretty much a done deal from everything I hear. That's coming. But Gonzaga being a basketball, they don't have a football program, but what Yormark is trying to do for the next time that media rights come around, he's trying to separate out college basketball and sell it on its own. I've seen estimates that he's expecting to get upwards of $25 million per school for their basketball program because the Big 12 is the deepest conference already in the country. It would theoretically be adding blue blood Arizona, another blue blood in Gonzaga, and they've even had talks about UConn. I've seen Villanova being talked about as well. And you got to remember that this is a guy that is all about making big deals. Brett Yormark what a huge move for the Big 12. Had they kept, I'm not even going to get into all this again, but we're talking about a conference that's been so poorly run, just like the Pac-12 for a long time. And this is a guy that absolutely knows what he's doing. Yormark, he ran the Barclays Center. He did the rebrand and relaunch of NASCAR. This dude is highly respected, and he's talked about doing some stuff, the pro days all in one place, almost like a draft combine for the Big 12 itself. They're going to do it in New York. This is smart things that he's trying to do to keep this conference viable. Meanwhile, Kliavkoff is out there putting out propaganda. again, if you saw everything, I mean, just looking at that video, he went back and forth from 3 different times. And, they're talking about, you know, Arizona not leaving with the Zags, Gonzaga, because they don't need to, and they're close, and they're so close to. Uh, he's like, well, they're just a basketball school. You know what? It's mostly a basketball conference after Texas and Oklahoma leaves, unless they get the Four Corner schools. Then you're going to have Coach Prime. You'll have Utah. Again, I don't know how that's going to go, but I mean, the theory is that you get Utah, Colorado. That immediately is another thing to sell if you're your mark. The writing's on the wall here. The writing is on the wall. And I want to show you one more thing here, coming from these guys.
A certain academic standard, the Pac-12 schools wanting to make sure wherever they wind up feels a certain way and they have a certain type of relationship. Whether you like or don't like that is inconsequential. The reality is that's how they feel. And I think, this conversation we had yesterday with our sources and a lot of the information that we got really painted that picture. And so when we titled the show today, hey, is the Pac-12 burning to the ground? Is the Pac-12 going to make it? Is the Pac-12 going to survive? I don't know. And that's my honest answer. I really don't know, because until we get the numbers, until we understand how, this TV situation comes back and impacts folks like Cosse at Washington or Robbins at Arizona or here. And I think different people feel differently about it, and that's making it really tough to get anything done. Pac-12 is not in some great place. Like, I'm with you on it. But it's definitely not an all-California conference, and I do think that there are ways they could fix this.
The thing that's so odd to me is there's so many people, I feel like, rooting for the Pac-12 to collapse. And that, I think, is what I don't understand. What is the reasoning? Where was the jump off point where people started rooting against the Pac-12? And I mean rooting against them, not on the field, but in existence. Like hoping that the Pac-12 collapses or implodes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I don't understand. Like, where did that come from? And
a Kansas fan, what they want to happen to the Big 12. Kansas fan probably would tell you, hey, I think there are a bunch of arrogant schools who are living a certain type of way in California, and they just have their certain types of belief, and we don't want them in the Big 12. We don't want them anyway, so who cares if their conference dissolves?
I'm not the person that's like, oh, well, academically, the Big 12 can hang with the Pac-12. No, they can't, right? Like, the truths are the truths. I think you have a more passionate, plugged in, more, interested fan base in the Big 12.
Facts.
I think Pac-12 schools, for better or for worse, they're not the sit around at a tailgate all day on Saturday and can't wait for that kickoff tonight. That's not how the Pac-12 works. And if you look at the remaining schools, that's certainly not how it works.
This is exactly what the problem is. Exactly what the problem is. It's what the problem's been. Okay. You have this ridiculous narrative out there. Number one, let even assuming that what they're saying is true, that it's so bad academically in the Big 12, which is a load of horse crap. Okay. It's complete bullshit or horse shit, whatever you want to call it. Bottom line is they do study different things, but I would tell you, as I've said on my live stream before, first and foremost, you're going to tell me that the Texas medical system from the University of Texas could it be in the AAU if it wanted to be? I'm going to tell you it could. Baylor could be an AAU school if it wanted to be. Absolutely. Oklahoma and its medical school could be an AAU school if it wanted to be. The rest of the schools are agricultural schools. That doesn't mean that you're not academically sound. None of that really matters. But this narrative that gets pushed out there, and it's been pushed out there by Wilner and by Canzano as well. Okay, it's been pushed by Kliavkoff, trying to scare his schools into staying when they don't have to. Um, Obviously, not all of them are going to be getting a Big Ten invite or an SEC invite. If they wanted them, they'd already have them. Okay, believe me, they'd already have them. But you can see Utah, you can see Colorado, you can see the Arizona schools, particularly with this basketball thing that Yormark's trying to do in the Big 12. When you've got a guy like Coach Sanders, Coach Deion Sanders, Coach Prime at Colorado now, who's a marketing whiz himself, he knows how to market himself. They're recruiting at the very top. They're going to turn Colorado around. I don't care what the people, there's a lot of haters out there. You guys can hate away. I'm going to tell you now, Coach Prime's going to win, and he's going to win big. And when you stick him with a guy like Yormark, who's a major, I mean, this guy gets deals done. He's a promoter. I mean, the guy has promoted the biggest acts in the world at Barclays Center, along with the Brooklyn Nets, the entire rebrand that they did. Kliavkoff hasn't made a move correct yet. Not one. And the narratives that are going out there, as I said in the start of this video, all is really doing is completely imploding somebody like John Wilner and John Canzano's credibility, because they're going against every other major media company in the world that's reporting all this stuff. You're going to tell me that this guy who's won 7 Emmys, he's won 7 Emmys for producing sports content. He's actually developed 5 different regional sports networks. I think he knows what he's talking about. And he's telling you right now in this story with Dennis Dodd that this isn't going to happen. Not the way that they want it to. And if Washington and Oregon are telling you that they're not going to take a majority, or if any of them say no to a majority streaming deal, it only takes one in their deal to nix it. If any one of them does it, this thing is over with. I'm going to say this one last time. You're not moving the University of Utah to Texas. You will not lose your AAU status because your football team plays in the Big 12. It's another stupid narrative, and it makes Kliavkoff look completely he looks completely clueless. He has been clueless from day one on this. Yormark tried to, extend an olive branch and merge the 2 leagues, and they wanted nothing to do with it. He didn't even have to. All this guy has done is make misstep after misstep, and you've got guys like, not that Monty has a lot of credibility, because he doesn't. It's all stick and BS with this guy. If you've watched his show at all, you know that. Kind of entertaining sometimes. They're funny. They're full of shit, though. And every day they start their show with that same thing. And they contradict themselves day after day after day. That one show, they contradicted themselves 10 different times. I have no inkling that they even know what a source is. They don't. These guys, they don't know what they're talking about. But it tells you that even if they thought they did, they're wrong. They're not. 1 second he's telling you that it's never going to happen, that they're not going to move, because Utah's saying that they're not going to go to the Big 12 because they're that concerned about the academics, which is stupid. The next second, they're telling you that it very well could happen. The next second, it's, I don't know what's going to happen. And then they tell you that, the next day it's you're hearing about this company or that company, and nobody's hearing about any of this stuff. I have not been able to find anywhere where Arizona and Gonzaga were talking about leaving together. But I'm going to tell you that this is the only thing that can happen for these schools to survive and be able to continue to compete, is to leave that conference. Because believe me, Oregon will. And if you're going to go with this, clinging to that education stuff, maybe you just end up not getting invited. San Diego State, Normark wants to be in that last time zone. They were just in the championship game of the Final Four as well. They've been talking about them going to the Pac-12. That's a possibility. But if the Pac-12 is no longer a Power 5 conference, because it won't be, then why wouldn't you be able to get them too if you're the Big 12? There's a lot of options there. There's none for the Pac-12, it looks like. I mean, and nobody's saying that there is, aside from the propaganda crew, Wilner, Canzano, and dummies like, Monty. Take it as you will. I'm going to leave it at that. I could just tell you that I don't see another way out of this and I know for sure that Colorado did not hire Coach Prime so they could stick him on a streaming service for more than 70% of or more than 50% of the time. I don't see it. And television executives that know what the hell they're talking about don't see it. The wrestling deal, the UFC deal, took up more space that might have been suitable for the Pac-12. What's left? Get out while you can, Four Corner Schools, and call it a day. Folks, do me a favor, hit that like button. Make sure you do that. We are on the road we're almost to 1,500 subscribers. It would be great to get there sooner than possible. I really, really want to make sure that we are at 2,000 subscribers by the time the season starts. Help me out. Share with your friends. You can always help support the show with tips on CASHAPP or Venmo, which is right below me. And make sure to check out the podcast merch site, which is above. And then we obviously have our deal with Fanatics as well. Get up to 65% off everything in the Fanatics store just by using our link. It's there at the bottom left of your screen. Thanks a lot for stopping by, everybody. And make sure to tune in tonight at 8:30 Eastern Time for our Hall of Fame college football live stream with myself and hopefully the coach, Philip Roybal.